responses back from MPs. So Neil, who's a member of our London group, his MP Stephen Timms wrote to Difford on Neil's behalf, and last week Neil received a reply from Alistair Burt, who's the minister at Difford. And in the letter it said 2017 is an important year for education financing, and Difford wholly supports the successful replenishment of the GPE and will be encouraging other donors to increase their funding. That was a really encouraging sign. And thank you also to everyone else who's taking the action and let us know. We've heard of lots of you and Paul, especially Deirdre, who we received her MP's letter that she sent a copy to us in the post yesterday. And yeah, really good to see all these positive responses. And if anyone else has heard back from their MP, we'd love to know, so please drop us an email. Last week, actually, Jill at the Study Group met up with Peter's new MP, Kemi Badenoch, at her first ever surgery. It did really well to get an appointment. And they had a really productive meeting. In their 15-minute slot, they managed to talk about a whole range of different development issues, but education was the top of their list to talk about. And I wondered if Jill or Peter might want to share about how the meeting went. Do you know if Jill or Peter are on the call?
Yeah, Jill should be on the call, but I assume...
Is Pete there?
Hi, Jill.
Hi there, Maddie. Hi, everybody. If Pete's on the call, it's really Pete's MP.
I don't think he is.
No, she's a new MP. She comes from Nigeria, but she's lived in the USA and UK as well. And she sent a really positive email back to Pete. We had a great time. We had 15 minutes and we actually managed to scrape 20 minutes out from her, and she thanked us for she said it's so good to meet people that are interested in this, and it's really great. And then Pete had an email back from her saying she was going to write to Difford about GPE, so we were able to fill her in on what GPE was. She hadn't heard of it. And that was really good. We also had a plug for polio, and she said, oh yes, I know about One Last Push. And we had a little go about TB as well, so we ranged far and wide. It was a really good meeting, and really pleased that we made that contact. I think she's one to watch.
Super, thanks very much, Jill.
Okay.
I, for one, was really impressed with the way that Jill did her research ahead of the meeting, and she looked up Kemi's maiden speech that she's made in Parliament, and I think was maybe initially a little bit worried that maybe they would disagree on politics and things like that, but Jill really cleverly found an author that they both liked, and used that as a way to break the ice at the beginning of the meeting. So that was a really good idea, worth sharing.
All three of us like Terry Pratchett, so that was a really good. That was a really good cause. So we had a little discussion about which our favourite character was and why. That was really good.
Really clever and important to remember that our MPs are often just the same as us. And yeah, good way to break the ice at the start of the meeting. So also, since the last call, the London group has been out and about campaigning on education in Wandsworth at a lovely community festival. They invited me along as well, but there's more than enough of them here in the group to tell you a bit more about what they got.
So we had we're looking at each other. So we had an event. It was a couple of weeks ago in the middle of July in Wandsworth. Really nice day out. So the Get Active Wandsworth Festival, which focuses on well-being and health. So our event was about education. Obviously, we were campaigning for the Education Matters campaign and supporting GPE. We had two different things that we were doing on that day. So firstly we had some really nice postcards and some colouring pencils and children to colour in pictures of schools, and we asked for their parents and children themselves to write messages to the MP to say why they supported education, why they thought education was important. And we also did a kind of Twitter campaign as well. And so we went around to the different stalls and went and spoke to kind of random people and asked them to pose with the Education Matters sign and post that on Twitter. and then bombard MPs essentially that way too. And so now we are kind of seeing the results of that. So we've got lots of postcards, we've written cover letters to like 6 different MPs across London, and we send those letters and colouring in from the children to all those different MPs in support of GP.
Great, thank you, Neil. I'm just aware we're a little bit behind time, and we've got a speaker who can't join us for that long. So, is there any other quick events that we haven't heard about? I also just aware that since we started the call, we've had a whole load of new people join who weren't here when I did my first introduction. Particularly, I think we've got some people from Warwick joining for the first time. So, welcome to you. And a few other people 2 people called Tim and a couple of other people I don't recognise. So anybody who's new, welcome. If anyone wants to do a shout out, please do. Well, yeah, welcome to everybody who's joined the call since we first started, and apologies not to catch on to that sooner. Any other news from around the network before I see if our expert speaker is with us?
Okay with asking the question, Ricky? Yeah, cool. Yeah, magic.
Hi there, Macclesfield.
Hello.
So, okay, so sorry to push us on just a little bit. Can I just check, Gideon, are you with us?
I am. Apologies, I had hoped to join by online, but I'm calling in on a phone.
Don't worry. Thank you for joining us. So I'm just going to introduce Gideon quickly, who's our expert speaker. So this month's call is about international aid, and our action is relatively lightweight action for results, which is to do a summer postcard on support for what aid achieves. Now, I was going to say a couple of words of introduction, but I'm aware, unfortunately, Gideon isn't able to join us for a terribly long time, so I'm going to cut my introduction a bit short. Many of you who've been following these calls for probably the best part of a year know that we've been following some of the attacks in the media on international aid. And we want to make sure that there is equally people who are aware that there's actually strong public support for aid. It's not just that we want this government spending to be there per se, but that we believe very strongly in some of the things that British aid achieves, and some of the things that we reported on earlier in the call that we've achieved on, such as overcoming infectious diseases, providing education, good nutrition. All of these are the really amazing things that we think are the right things for us to be spending our money on as a relatively wealthy country. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail about this now. We can pick up some of these strands of conversation in the discussion to follow. But to start with, I just want to welcome Gideon Rabinowitz from Oxfam onto our call. So, Gideon, thank you so much for joining us. Gideon
No worries.
Forgive me if I get your job title wrong. I think he's Policy Manager on Development Finance at Oxfam GB.
Correct.
And has overseen policy engaging the UK government on its aid budget, and has previously been a researcher on aid issues at the ODI, or Overseas Development Institute, and coordinated the UK Aid Network and worked on trade and development issues in East Africa. So with that brief introduction, I don't know if you want to say a bit more, but thank you, Gideon, for joining us on our call. You're with enthusiastic and experienced campaigners, and some not so experienced, from Edinburgh and Lithgow in the north to Poole and Brighton in the south. And these are people who take regular actions such as visiting MPs, doing local media work, that kind of thing. So
fantastic. Real pleasure to be with you all, and you're all doing such important work, and I've become increasingly aware of that fact over the last 6 months, since we've seen firstly as you've already mentioned, a very strong media backlash against the government's ambitious policies around aid and their commitment to meet the international standard of delivering 0.7% of national income as international aid. And we've also seen that media backlash grow into an increasingly challenging political context as well. So we've seen an increasing number of MPs asking questions about the aid budget. Questions are always welcome, but also really one or two questioning whether the 0.7 we can afford the 0.7% commitment, and whether this is something that we as a country should continue to stand for. Thankfully, the vast majority of MPs do support this commitment and do support a very ambitious aid agenda. But our job at Oxfam is to, number one, make sure that the public stay behind us, our MPs continue to support us and to defend the aid budget in Parliament. But also, what we're increasingly focused on is making sure that the 0.7% and the way it is spent actually targets the people who are poorest and most marginalised across the world.
So can I just cut in there? I think you might be about to go into the territory of some of the questions that we've prepared for you. So I wonder, would it be possible to go over to those questions, and then if you've got anything to add to those. Thank you for that really useful introduction as to why this matters. So we've got 3 questions. I hope you'll be able to stay for those. The first question is, I think someone from Brighton was going to ask the question. Brighton, do you have a question from Gideon from Oxfam? Are we on mute?
Can you hear us okay?
Yes, we got you. Yeah, hi.
Hi, Gideon. Why is it important to keep talking about the UK aid budget now that the government has publicly committed itself to current spending levels? Isn't the target of spending 0.7% of national income on aid an easy target for Aidscape?
Okay, so I think essentially the second part of that question answers the first part. So as the question correctly states, the current position, the position of the current government is to remain committed to delivering 0.7% of national income. The UK has hit this target over the last 3 years. It's the first major global economy to hit 0.7. So there's a number of smaller countries which have hit this target, but it's the first of the G7, the major global economies to hit this target. So it's a really important thing. But as you say, there are constantly questions being asked about whether this is the right thing to do. Every time an issue comes up in the UK, do we have enough money to spend on nurses? Do we have enough money to spend on education? Can we invest adequately in flood defences? Are our small businesses being hit by taxes that are too high? Every time these issues appear in the media, the aid skeptics come out and try and link those issues to the issue around aid and question whether the government can continue to remain committed. So it's an issue that is constantly being challenged by politicians and the media. The other point I would make as well is that right now Theresa May is not in a very strong position. She could be challenged in her leadership of the Conservative Party at any time. And even if she's not, there is actually a lot of disagreement within the cabinet, which could lead to a different direction for the government to take on aid. So we need to remain vigilant. We need to be continually making the argument to our politicians, to our local MPs, with the media, that this commitment is saving millions of lives across the world, and is an important part of our responsibility to make the world a better place.
Fantastic, thank you. That's really, really clear indication of why we need to be keeping on working on this. Can we move on to the question, which I think is from London? Who in London was going to pitch in with the next question?
Hi, Gideon.
Hey there.
Yeah, we talk about the quality of aid funding being important, but what does that mean in reality? What does good quality look like?
Oh, good question. So I'll give you the simple answer, and then try and give you a little bit of a flavour of the more complicated answer. So the simple answer is good quality aid is aid that achieves all it can to support the very poorest and most marginalized people around the world. So good quality aid is targeted at those who need it the most. Now, what that means in practice is another question. So one of the challenges that aid agencies and NGOs face across the world is that often the people that need aid the most are often the hardest to reach. It's very, very challenging to reach poor people who live in very remote areas, who are socially marginalized and therefore are maybe hidden or discriminated against within their communities, and also in places where there is conflict, instability, violence. There is often very significant need for humanitarian and development assistance, and those are very challenging places to provide aid. So actually reaching the very poorest people is a very difficult challenge indeed. One of the issues that we're finding in tracking how the UK government is delivering aid right now is that there is an effort by some politicians, by some parts of the government, to be looking to use aid to pursue the UK's own national interests. So the logic is that if we're spending this money, then not only should it help the world's poor, but it should also be working to promote and support the interests of the UK as well. And I think our major concern is that all too often these objectives don't coincide. So often where you're trying to spend money in a country where in a way that benefits the UK, you will undermine the effort to target the very poorest people. So I'll give you a very practical, simple example. The government has started spending more money in more advanced middle-income countries such as China, Brazil, and even Turkey. And the reason that we're spending money in those countries is because we see them as future trading places where we want to develop trade, we want to promote UK business opportunities. And whilst that aid will be helping improve people's lives in some way, we don't think many of those countries are ones where we should be spending significant amounts of international aid, because they are places where there are a relatively small number of people living in extreme poverty, and those countries are more advanced than some of the poorest countries in the world. So one of the things we're working very, very hard to do at Oxfam, but also across the NGO sector, including Results, is to track where we see a conflict between the effort to focus on the poorest people and a growing interest in using aid to support the UK's foreign economic and trade interests. And we will be challenging the government wherever we see those conflicts arising. And that's a really critical agenda for us right now.
Thank you, Gideon, for that. I've got some noise, some background noises. So if there's someone who's not speaking, would you mind just muting? Struggling to see who's unmuted at the moment. Okay. So can we now go to the third question, which I think was from Macclesfield? Ricky, were you going to ask that question?
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
Hi, Ricky. Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Gideon. Thank you very much for your talks. Very interesting. My question is it right to focus on the promised 0.7% GDP aid budget in a kind of narrow way, when actually we could be pushing the government for contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals and, you know, ending poverty by 2030, which is about a lot more than just aid?
You're absolutely right. So fortunately, I and some of the colleagues of mine in the sector who work on aid, we are actually in a minority in terms of the people working across the sector on issues that matter for development. And I think there's been a growing recognition amongst NGOs like Oxfam and Results that aid is only part of the answer to solving, to eradicating global poverty and solving the development challenges that we face today. We constantly agonize over whether challenging the government on aid takes away from the effort to ensure that the government is using all the other policies and areas in which it operates internationally to support the development agenda. So, for example, trade policy is absolutely critical to pursuing the SDGs and helping improve people's lives and help people work out of poverty, work away out of poverty. Responsible tax policy, ensuring that corporations operating in developing countries pay adequate levels of tax, is also an absolutely critical component of promoting global prosperity and improving people's lives across the world. Governance, transparency, addressing climate change, improving the environment. These are absolutely critical to the future of our world. So, you know, you are right. Aid is only part of the solution, but again, it's an important one, and we shouldn't underestimate the amazing things that aid has done. So, just to give you a couple of examples, I'm sure you're aware of this from the work that you do around health and education. Over the last decade, the number of people dying from malaria has fallen by almost half, and international aid has been one of the most important sources of finance to support the global effort to tackle malaria. You know, millions of lives have been saved as a result of malaria control programs, and you'll know only too well. Very similar impacts have been achieved in relation to HIV/AIDS. So aid continues to be incredibly important, but as you say, it's only one part of the solution to addressing global poverty and making the world a place where everybody has the basics to live a life of opportunity and good health.
Great, thank you. That's really helped, I think, put our aid action this month in a bit of context. I said earlier on I was aware that Gideon you're not able to join us for as long as we...
I can take a few more questions, that's fine.
Okay, how many minutes have we got of your time? Because I don't want to...
I'll give you till about 8:45.
That's really kind. So let's then open it up to questions from the floor, and then we can carry on the discussion for a few minutes after he's had to leave us. I'm just going to give you the text number if you want to text a question, as we usually do. 07906 662 571. That's 07906 662 571, and You pick that up. You've also got the chat function if you're not joined us by phone of this Zoom interface. Otherwise, particularly for those of you on the call who are completely new to the way we run these calls, please just feel free to unmute and shout who you are and just ask a question. So I think, can I start by seeing if there's anyone on the phones who want to ask a question, particularly if you're someone new, but anybody really? Just shout out.
Hi, it's Neil. I'm not new, but I'd like to ask a question.
Okay. Anyone else? Can I just take a couple of names and we'll ask the questions one after the other so we make the most of Gideon's time? And let's take another question as well.
Anyone else with any other questions? You're going to have to pick.
Sorry, I didn't hear. Who was that?
That was Sarah.
Okay, so Neil, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So my question is, obviously we're engaging with our MPs relatively regularly. And my MP, Alex Short, he's come back, not to me specifically, but elsewhere, and he's arguing for the 0.7% to be spread over 5 years, presumably over a parliament, to kind of prevent the kind of spread, the rush for spending at the end of each financial year. What's your take on that? And what's your response to that?
What a good question. Very interesting, and I'd be really happy to sort of help through Results for you to follow up on this question in proper detail. So please, plead to the Results people to keep me in touch with how we respond to this question, because it is one that has been proposed by. It was initially proposed in the House of Lords, and we have seen some interest in this proposal. I think our response, my response to it, is that it introduces a lot of risk. So let's say a government's elected. They say, right, across the 5 years of the Parliament, we will spend 0.7. Let's say they undershoot and deliver less than 0.7 in the first 3 or 4 years. They then have to spend an enormous amount of money. And let's be realistic. There'll be plenty of incentives for the government to undershoot maybe at the beginning of a Parliament, so they can spend lots more money in other areas and fulfil election pledges. But then you get to the end of the Parliament, and suddenly they have to spend much more significant amounts to make up for the shortfall in earlier years. How easy is that to do in the run-up to election? What are the risks there around misspending the money? And surely you just save up an even bigger issue of getting an even bigger amount of money out of the door in a much shorter period at the end of a Parliament. So our perspective is there are all sorts of risks in spending 0.7 in that way, and we really think politically it will create lots of incentives to underspend on 0.7 because politically it'd be very hard to make up for any shortfalls in years where they've spent under 0.7. I think the other issue is the media overblows quite how big this issue is about overspending, rushing money out of the door in order to meet 0.7. Up to, the government knows, there's much better planning in place now, given that we've met 0.7 for the last 3 years. There is much better planning in place to ensure that the money can be spent in a timely way. It is not rushed out the door, and the right projects are in place to ensure that the increased aid budget can be spent wisely. So we just think this is an issue that the media have overblown, and it really shouldn't be taken as seriously as it is by some parts of the media.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that excellent question, Neil. We got probably time for one quick question from somebody else before we have to say goodbye to Gideon. This is most unusual for this group. There's usually loads and loads of questions. Maybe there's
please, come on, one more.
Carrie, yes, go for it. Oh, sorry, Jill.
It's all right. If it's only one question, what are the dangers of other departments spending the money apart from DFID, as the government is suggesting?
Fantastic question. Excellent. I mean, you've basically identified for me one of the biggest risks about in relation to poor quality aid right now in the UK political context. So you're very right to raise the issue, because over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a very rapid increase in the level of aid spent outside of the UK Department for International Development. Now, in principle, that's not a bad thing. The Foreign Office has fantastic diplomatic skills. They work on human rights. They can help on the governance agenda. The Department for Health has world-leading health expertise. It can help on global pandemics and address global health challenges. The Department for Business has expertise in promoting investment, promoting trade, promoting growth across the world. So these departments clearly have skills that can contribute and add to the UK's aid and development efforts. But in practice, what we see is that a lot of these departments, because they are set up to pursue the UK's global interests. So the Department for International Trade is there to support the UK's trade interests. The Department for Health, in addition to supporting, in addition to facilitating the UK's own health services, has the responsibility to promote global health and protect the UK in an increasingly small world where health pandemics and health risks can move across borders. So what we see is in practice, when this aid is handed over to these departments, it is used in ways that much more strongly emphasize promoting the UK's interests than we would like. So as I mentioned earlier, the Foreign Office and the Department for International Trade are using aid in countries where we have interest in developing business and trade linkages, but where we don't think there is necessarily such a significant need for supporting people to escape from poverty. So absolutely one of the biggest challenges right now is to ensure that those other government departments that are receiving aid are using it in the best way possible to support people to escape from poverty and improving people's lives in the most challenging places in the world. And that's a really critical challenge. And, it's one that I think we should all be trying to engage our MPs and our politicians on in the coming years.
Thank you so much for that, Gideon. And I should say thank you for joining us overall this evening. I think we need to let you go now. I'm aware you've got a lot happening. So Gideon is obviously a real expert on this subject. We're working on this within Results as well, but he's playing a real leadership role.
I work very closely with a number of your colleagues.
Absolutely,
yep.
And particularly Callum, I think, who isn't here this evening.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm
no
sure
worries.
we'll be
in
touch.
Thanks for the great questions and the enthusiasm, and you're all doing fantastic work, and we need more of it. So keep it up.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gideon.
Okay, so Gideon's had to go, but we've got a few more minutes, and we do, as I say, have some. We've been working as Results as part of this coalition, of which Gideon is also a part. So myself, Maddie, have been involved in this work. Callum, who I just mentioned, and also Laura, who I think is still on the call. If Laura's here, she may be muted. I saw her on the chat earlier. Oh, hi.
Hello.
So I'd quite like it if we can carry on this discussion, even though we've lost our expert speaker. We've got a lot of knowledge around the network itself. People may have additional sort of discussion points on some of the themes that we've already been talking about. One of the things that I just wanted to raise before opening that up was firstly, in the action that we're suggesting to people, it's writing a sort of summer postcard. Now, that's a very lightweight action compared to some of the things that you do. Obviously, you're very often writing on very detailed issues, lobbying in person, your MP. And so we just wanted to say a little bit about why we chose to do that. Firstly, we're trying to make sure that they're aware there's more general support in their constituencies. So if you can spread the word, get other people who perhaps wouldn't feel comfortable doing the kinds of actions that you do. And secondly, there are, I know already from a number of contacts, there may be MPs who are a bit new to this issue. If they're a new MP, they just need to know that there are people who support aid but aren't necessarily able to sort of talk to these issues in a great deal of detail. So do feel free to play with it. There are action materials which you should have been emailed. If not, do get in touch. It's on our website under Get Involved if you want to find it that way. But I did want to say, use this suggestion in any way that you feel you can. I know that some of you who've got a much more in-depth and ongoing relationship with your MP probably won't feel so comfortable sending them a simple postcard message. So if there's any issues around that form the discussion, then let's carry on with that, or let's carry on with some of the more detailed issues. So I'm just going to open it up to absolutely anybody to just pile in now for the last 10 minutes.
Hi, Naveed, it's Vicky in Birmingham.
Hi, Vicky, go ahead.
Hello. This it relates to what you were just saying, but also to something Jill said earlier. I think even where we've got MPs that we know are really, really on board, sometimes I guess something like this might feel a bit pointless with them. But one of the things that came out of the international conference when we had all the Congress people there come and talk to us at the actual conference was them talking about how actually hearing from Results motivates them when they're losing resolve, when they know they believe in it, but they feel they're fighting a losing battle sometimes, and that actually hearing from their results people give them a sort of enthusiasm boost to actually crack on and do something additional and to keep going and not get too down about it. So that sort of really resonated with me, because I often felt that MPs that were already on board, there was less need to give them these little thank yous and stuff.
Yes.
So just to reinforce that, really.
I think that's absolutely right. And I should say one other thing about this relatively light action. It can be made a bit fun, but if ideally it would be kind of handwritten. So we do know from feedback from MPs that they do like handwritten messages, even if they're short. It shows that someone's actually made an effort to do something, pick up a pen in the old-fashioned way, put a stamp on it, and do an action rather than just click on a website, although there is a place for that too. I've just seen 2 other questions come in now, neither of which I can answer, so I'm hoping that somebody else can. I'm going to start with one that was just texted in. I don't know who it was. I don't have your number. I've just got the number on the screen, but it's, will Brexit make aid diversion, for example, to trade worse? Does anyone have any... Oh, that might be the same as Peter's question. I've just seen Peter type into the text box as well. Yeah, what's the best way for our MPs to hold the government accountable to spending aid budget on those who need it most, rather than diverting it towards trade interests? So following on from Gideon's points about UK interests, what's the best way to actually hold our government accountable to that? So there's 2 questions there. Laura, do any of those strike you as ones that you would want to make a stab on initially?
Sure, I'm very happy to jump in. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, very well, loud and clear.
Okay, great. I should say that Callum is definitely our kind of policy lead on this, but in terms of answering quickly about Brexit, I think a lot of it is still very unknown, and I think the government themselves don't really know what they plan to do. The UK government gives a lot of its aid money through the EC at the moment, and that money is some of the kind of the most well spent that we do, and I think they will have to really look at whether that money can still be channeled through there, or whether we will have to kind of divert that into our own bilateral programmes, and that itself is an opportunity for the UK to expand some of the great work that it does on essential services such as health and education at the moment. So sorry, I don't have very concrete answer on that one. I think the government themselves don't know, and I think the sector will be working very closely over the next few months and years until Brexit eventually happens, to make sure that, like a lot of kind of shock decisions, that this doesn't impact on the kind of the long-term kind of value and respect that people have for UK aid and how it's being spent at the moment. And in terms of holding about government accountability for the projects that the UK supports at the moment, there are lots of different ways, and a lot of the work that Results already does kind of contributes to that. I think there's no one way. Like everything Results do, I work in the policy team, and I'm always kind of asking the government, well, have you spent the money that you said you were going to? What does that look like? What impact has the project has? And if you look on Dev Tracker, all the projects that that go through DFID at the moment, not through other government departments, there's usually like impact assessment there that you can kind of go on, and there's lots of different bodies like the International Development Committee, that's kind of a cross-party group of parliamentarians. They're always kind of scrutinising the government, holding inquiries on, like really checking about how that money's being spent, and the same with the Independent Commission on Aid Impact. And I think when all these, they produce reports at various times, and I think when there's kind of something that we think is kind of quite important to you, we'll certainly kind of come to you with questions for MPs, parliamentary questions around these reports when they come out that kind of keep the government in check about how they're spending money are really useful, as well as some of the kind of the all-party parliamentary groups. So I think government accountability on spending is a massive topic, and again something lots of organisations in the sector work on. I wouldn't say there's a very specific action off the top of my head at the moment, but kind of everything that we're asking the UK government to do to keep up. Some of your postcards might talk about kind of how the money's been spent on evidence-based kind of solutions for things like health and education that we know works and what makes a real impact, as well as things about transparency. And so yes, there's lots of ways through your MP, and I think keep an ear out on results, and we'll definitely let you know if there's something
absolutely
specific. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And can I just back up what you just said on accountability and transparency? So Dev Tracker was the thing that Laura just mentioned. Some of you may know about it already, but I'll give you the web address for that. It's www.devtracker, so DEV tracker, all one word, .dfid, DFID, .gov.uk. So it's devtracker.dfid.gov.uk, and it's got huge amounts of facts and figures ranging from the detailed data and project plans that the finances that Laura mentioned, right through to kind of graphics and simple bullet points and percentages and pie charts, some really useful stuff that you can use with your MP. So maybe some of that stuff you might want to use on your postcards. It's just a thought. I've got a question in from Macclesfield as well. So did you want to pitch in at this point?
Me again.
Hi, Ricky, go for it.
Apologies, you can't keep me down. But I just wonder are we still using the term aid? Because as you were, you believe this too, don't you, judging by the email you sent me earlier today. It's not development, is it, aid? And it feels really wrong to me that we refer to the aid budget as an aid budget, because it is, and it ought to be a development budget. So is that tripping us up, or does it really not matter what we call it?
I think it might be, and I think this is for everyone to make their own judgment, but I'll give a very brief, what I think my response would be, and maybe Laura might want to kick in. So you're absolutely right. We should be focusing on international development and the gains made by international development. And let's face it, international development is a very difficult term for most of the public who don't understand these things. So we could be talking about things like kids getting vaccinations, or kids in school, or people gaining their rights to equality, or all the different things that we work on. I think people need to see concrete things. So whenever you're having conversations, think about the actual changes that you want to see in the lives of people. But you're right, these are broadly international development, and aid is just a word that we know gets the wrong signals out there. Some of it is genuinely aid. I mean, if you think about the fairly high proportion of DFID's budget which goes to humanitarian crises, that is actually aid to people who need it most. It is perhaps more traditional what people think of aid, but we need to move people's understanding on, I think. They need to understand that most of it actually doesn't go to people being given things and being given shelter and being given seeds and tools, or the other things that happen increasingly little in international development. A lot of it is about helping governments and countries stand on their own 2 feet, which could involve all sorts of things. It could involve training, it could involve helping governments to increase their tax take from their country. So there's all sorts of ways in which people need to understand the reality, and to some extent I think the sector is a bit guilty of talking about these in a way that is no longer true, and the world's moved on in the last 30 years. So I kind of, in broad terms, really agree with you, but I want to open that up to other people we've got a couple of minutes if anyone wants to sort of say their take on that, because it's a really important question, and I'm grateful you've raised it. Did anyone have any thoughts on that, or if Laura wanted to add anything to my last answer there?
Yeah, I'll just maybe jump in quickly. I think I would completely agree that the work that we do at Results is very much focused on long-term sustainable development that makes sure that people can kind of stand on their own 2 feet and are not reliant on handouts, agreeing that aid in some of the most dire humanitarian situations is desperately needed. But if you speak to people about international development, and I certainly know this from trying to explain to my friends what I do for a living, can sometimes be quite complicated. So sometimes kind of talking about aid and it's the strategy that the UK uses to kind of guide all its work in this area is called the UK aid strategy. It's sometimes a way that you can open that conversation, and I think the way that we, as Naveed's correctly highlighted, how we talk about it publicly and what we understand from aid and development is a really kind of complex kind of subject, and it depends on who you're speaking to and kind of what kind of message that you're trying to kind of put across there. So I say there's no particular kind of right or wrong answer, and no one's going to come after you if you use the wrong term, and it's just your kind of your own judgment understanding about who you're speaking to.
Thanks, Laura. And if anyone's got any questions about the kind of sorts of language that people find useful or different kind of audiences find useful, there's a huge amount of research on this, and I'd be really happy to take any of those questions offline. There's really a wealth of information. Before we close the call, I'm aware someone called Mike, it's coming up as Mike's iPhone on the screen, saying, could we get a link to that site? Was that the Dev Tracker site, or is there something, another piece of information you want us to get to you? Okay. Hello, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Am I on?
Yeah, you're on. Hi.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise. Yeah, so just the link to the Dev site, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got the proper address here in front of me. I just was calling up whilst people were talking. I'm going to post it into the chat box, but I'll also just read it out. It's https://devtracker.dfid.gov.uk, and I'm just going to put that into the chat box now.
Oh, I might have beat you, Naveed.
There we go.
Sorry.
There we go. So, oh, you got it twice now. Okay.
Thank you.
I think we're running out of time now, or we have run out of time. Feels like I've been chairing in a bit more of a disorganised way than usual, and sorry we didn't have our speaker quite so long as we'd like, but I think we had a really helpful conversation nonetheless. Very best of luck to those of you who are thinking about how to write your postcards or your own version of that action, whatever you want to do on aid. And particularly for all of the new people who's joined the call, the names and the numbers that I don't recognise. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I hope you found this evening's call stimulating. Do get in touch if you want any further information or background information about results or the work that we're doing. And I'm just going to let everybody go now. So thank you ever so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Thanks, Naveed.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Oh, there's Carrie. Hello, Carrie.
Bye.
I've turned the video on.